inherent right to issue promissory obligations free of exploitation and thus free of interest, by which we would merely give each other what we acquire even under this obfuscation, that is, equal production for equal production, determined by we ourselves. The real creditor, who gives up property for the promissory obligation, is paid only the principal. How could we possibly be injured by this discussion, which we can never have because every figurehead paraded before us is an agent of the banking system? How else could we be denied that vital debate if it weren't, on the other hand, that every leader before us is wholly unfit to govern? Has Ron Paul proved the obfuscation of the currency doesn't exist, or has he solved for it in advocating gold? Absolutely not. He hasn't even proposed how we can get there from here. We don't have a shot if it's up to what we call government, which on the contrary is usurped government everywhere in the world. Not only is it usurped, it is so evasive that it will not even respond to the only appeals which can save us, because those appeals would eradicate banking forever. Can they keep the house of cards erected? Absolutely not. The means of dispossession is inherently terminal. What terminal means is that it generates an artificially escalated sum of debt, which not only eventually exceeds our capacity to service it, but which sum of artificially escalated debt can only increase further, because in persisting in the obfuscation, all further reflation of the circulation, which is the only thing that can even keep us alive for a while longer, however artificially, all reflation comes into circulation as further falsified debt subject to interest. This is why the system is terminal. But this isn't, we should all have our feet up on our desks and turn to this side and a mug of beer in our hand, and this should be behind us, not just yesterday, decades ago at worst. We are at fault, that every one of us isn't above this is one of the most remarkable things in all human history. How is it that the people of every country of the world are so ignorant of this simple problem that besets us, that we've allowed a mere publisher of evidence of our own promissory obligations to intervene upon all of our commerce, as if they were indeed just a bank, and they had all this money all the while, and we were indeed borrowing it from their possession, when in fact, on the contrary, all the purported money that's ever created is merely published as a further representation of our own promissory obligations. It's as if we think we have to borrow our own contract whenever we write one. Nothing could be more stupid. So the consequence of this, of course, is, all these figureheads are pretending they're going to save us, as if the Republicans are going to do anything different than they've always done. And they're not even conservatives. To talk about government creating jobs, in truth, well, I don't like the term conservative. It just implies that there's a style of thinking, and that's not what makes a person a conservative. In truth, I believe that if every country was sustained by an intelligent public, truly capable of dealing with its issues, that we would all be basically, essentially, what's said to be conservative. That is, we would believe in minimal government, because it's only misgovernment or abuse of power which has created our problems. Or at worst, or at best, I would say it's ineptitude, inability to govern, unfitness to govern that's created these problems. But we know, because of persistent evasion, that it's not merely inadvertent, that this is an orchestrated conspiracy against the people of every country of the world. Of course, the thing to do isn't to throw bricks through windows and burn buildings down, but it is to learn what the cause of our problems are, so that if we are ready, finally, we're ready to adopt solution. So as we have said for 43 years, in fact, there is one and one only solution. But then the consequence of this multiplication of debt, well, these talking heads are pretending they're our saviors. The very next day I get another message, and I'm deluged with this stuff all day long. But stocks have closed sharply lower after investors sold stocks with abandon, convinced that the U.S. and the world are headed for a new recession. Lies, lies, lies. If you don't think that the media is part of this, that it isn't owned by the people who intend to persist in these crimes against us, you've got your eyes, they're super glued together. I mean, you're not even close to awake, are headed for a new recession. What evidence? It's impossible there was even any evidence that we were coming out of a recession. We went over this detail by detail months ago, clear back in January. We went over Ben Bernanke's claims, that a 0.25% rise in falsified unemployment figures, a 0.25% rise in employment figures, rather, which was falsified even by their own admission, because it was only related to people that were known to have fallen off the unemployment rolls because they'd been unemployed so long that they were no longer accounted for. And mind you, this has been happening for, in truth, decades. The unemployment figures everywhere in the world are a multiple of what every betraying government of the world publishes to the people, and what the betraying media, publish to the people. We have far more than 10% unemployment here in the United States. Far more. Far more. I hesitate to state what I think it's really closest to, because, people might think you're an alarmist, and I'll just say it's far more, And we know it's far more because people have been falling off the unemployment rolls for a long, 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 long while. This goes on. At the close of trading, the Dow was down 300. Previous sentence. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell as much as 527 points, the second consecutive rout since the Federal Reserve announced a change in strategy for fighting the economic slowdown. What's the change in strategy, ladies and gentlemen? All they can do is reduce interest rates. If interest is the problem, why have interest at all? How is interest justified? If we reduced all the interest and all the debt of the world to zero, and we counted all prior payments of interest, therefore instead toward principal, because we finally recognize that interest wasn't justified, because we're not borrowing money from banks, because banks are merely publishing further representations of our promissory obligations. Instead, we're not borrowing from the possession of banks. If we recognize that, what problems would we have? Most of the world's debt would have been dissolved merely for counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal. But what can the bank do but reduce interest or make more money available? Even if they make more money available, an obfuscation of the currency, I should say, available, subject to interest, it can only multiply an already terminal sum of debt further beyond an already terminal sum of debt. But if instead we recognize that interest was unwarranted because the banking system never even had property at stake, which it doesn't, and which it knows it doesn't. If we recognize that, our debts would be gone. The remaining schedules of payment on any remaining principal, if any, would be approximately 1/12 of what they are today. And we would be 12 times as liquid immediately, just for recognizing and rectifying a wrong that can be rectified by software in a day, in a fraction of a day. And they're telling us there's some new strategy. There's only two things a bank can do. It's been doing them. It's been pouring money into circulation. That money's been paid out of circulation as fast as it's been poured into circulation. And simpletons like Ron Paul have, complained that we're creating too much money, which is being paid out of circulation as fast as it's being created. Oh, and in circulatory inflation is causing our problems. When if we had circulatory inflation, we'd all be awash in money and, in fact, have none. Why is every town quiet, more quiet than ever before? Because the money's been paid out of circulation, owing to this obfuscation of the currency. Well, we need to get money back into circulation. Okay, but if you do, and it's the obfuscation, it increases the debt more than it was already, which was already terminal. How can that solve anything? Can you service more debt? No. Can you catch up to it? No. It's simple math. Elementary math. A child in elementary school can understand all this stuff. All of it. We have no excuse whatsoever. At the close of trading, the Dow was down 391.01 points, or 3.5%, at 10,733.83. The Standard & Poor's 500, and it goes on. The NASDAQ Composite fell. 19 stocks fell for every one that rose. Trading volume was high on the New York Stock Exchange at 6.9 billion. Oil and metals prices, which rely on economic demand, sank. Traders sought the safety of Treasury bonds. Oh, there's a good one. The safety of Treasury bonds. Just tell me something. There isn't a fraction of the money in circulation that's owed just in principle on the so-called federal debt, which is, as I've said, vastly understated. How are we ever going to pay that? Worse, why should we ever pay it? And therefore, what is the safety of Treasury bonds? On the one hand, even if we were inclined to pay it, we cannot. And on the other hand, we have no real, actual, lawful obligation to pay it, because it's a falsified debt which has been artificially escalated by this falsification of our promissory obligations into purported debts to a purported banking system which merely publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. We don't owe the bank this. We don't owe it to the government so that it can give it back to these few people who are buying this with